Mason Hale and Connor Briggs weren't just fugitives. They were ghosts in the system, criminals so cunning that they made the British police look powerless, leaving a trail of fear, mystery, and chaos in their wake. The alarm began as a faint echo in the corridor of Northmoor High Security Prison, a place known for its strict routines and unbreakable walls. Guards rushed toward the source, expecting a small disturbance, but what they found instead sent a wave of confusion through the entire facility. 2 inmates, Mason Hale and Connor Briggs, were missing from their adjoining cells. Both men had been serving long sentences for separate organized crime charges, and neither had any recent disciplinary issues that suggested an escape attempt. Their absence made no sense because the locks were intact, the cameras showed no signs of tampering, and the motion sensors registered nothing unusual. It was as if the inmates had simply stepped out of existence. Investigation inside the prison began immediately. Officers checked every corner, from the ventilation shafts to the utility tunnels, but no trace of forced entry or exit appeared. Mason's cell looked perfectly normal, with his bedding folded neatly and his belongings untouched. Connor's space was the same, creating an unsettling impression that the men had prepared for a silent departure long before anyone noticed. The prison warden was forced to issue an emergency alert after early searches revealed no sign of escape routes, making the situation even more alarming. For years, the prison had maintained a flawless reputation, and now 2 high-risk inmates had vanished without leaving evidence behind. As the morning sunlight spread across the compound, tension grew inside the control room, where officers replayed footage again and again. Every angle showed both men in their cells at night. Then the cameras flickered for half a second. When the screen cleared, the cells were empty. Technicians insisted that the system had no glitches or failures reported that night. Yet the recorded footage suggested otherwise. That half-second gap became the biggest mystery, and theories began to form. Some speculated that the fugitives had inside help from someone with advanced technical skills. Others believed that the escape had been planned months ahead with support from an unknown network outside the prison. A nationwide alert was issued within hours. Roads leading away from the region were monitored. Airports, railway stations, and ports received images of the fugitives. Patrol cars increased their routes in nearby towns as fear began to spread among residents living close to the prison. News channels quickly picked up the story, describing the escape as one of the most puzzling incidents in recent UK criminal history. Families of the inmates' past victims also voiced concern, fearing potential retaliation or unsettled scores. Despite the massive response, no confirmed sightings were reported in the first 24 hours. The fugitives seemed to have vanished more completely than anyone expected, leaving police with no direction to follow. Investigators felt an uncomfortable shift in the balance of control. The public looked to law enforcement for answers, but none were available. The prison's reputation was damaged, and questions began to rise about whether someone within the system had enabled the escape. As the search expanded across the region, one unsettling reality became clear. This was not a careless breakout. It was the beginning of something far more calculated and dangerous, and the authorities had no idea where the fugitives were heading or why they had chosen that moment to disappear. Investigators soon realized that the escape from Northmoor Prison was only the first step in a much larger plan. As officers combed through the digital records, phone logs, and visitor entries connected to Mason Hale and Connor Briggs, they repeatedly came across gaps that made no sense. Certain files were missing, and timestamps on key documents seemed altered. It became clear that the 2 fugitives were not relying on spontaneous decisions or brute force. They were being guided by something far more structured. The first major clue came from a hidden storage unit in Leeds, registered under a false identity. Inside, police found neatly arranged supplies, burner phones wrapped in foil, counterfeit passports, clothing, and a box full of foreign currency. Nothing pointed to where the fugitives had gone, but everything indicated that a network had prepared their escape long before the prison break occurred. As detectives expanded their search, more unusual findings surfaced. A A rented flat in Birmingham contained coded notebooks filled with symbols and short numbers. Specialists believed the notes represented meeting points or instructions, but none could be decoded immediately. Food wrappers and fresh footprints in the dust suggested that the flat had been used recently, possibly even after the escape. Just as police approached the next lead, the trail would abruptly end. Surveillance footage from the surrounding streets showed unidentified individuals, always wearing hats or masks, visiting the property days earlier. Their movements were precise and calm, as if they were trained to avoid drawing attention. Investigators suspected these individuals were part of the Fugitive support network, working invisibly to help them move across the country without detection. Reports from ordinary citizens added to the confusion. A shopkeeper in Sheffield claimed he saw two men matching the fugitive's description early one morning. But by the time officers arrived, the CCTV system had been wiped clean by an unknown virus. A taxi driver in Nottingham reported picking up two nervous passengers at night. However, when investigators checked his dashcam, the entire recording had been overwritten. Every lead seemed to vanish just as the police tried to secure it. These patterns suggested that the fugitives had someone manipulating technology from the shadows. The sophistication of the disruptions was higher than anything Mason or Connor had previously been capable of alone. Meanwhile, analysts reviewing financial transactions noticed small but suspicious withdrawals from different towns. Each withdrawal was made with cloned cards that linked back to Mason's old criminal connections. The timing of the withdrawals formed a strange pattern that looked like deliberate misdirection, leading investigators in multiple directions at once. Police resources stretched thin as teams followed every possible route, only to discover they were chasing ghosts. Speculation grew within the task force that the fugitives were being supported by individuals with professional skills, possibly former criminals, hackers or underground operatives with a history of working together. The idea that a hidden organization was orchestrating the entire escape sent a wave of unease through the investigation team. As days passed, frustration deepened. Officers felt as if they were always one step behind, and internal pressure grew as government officials demanded progress. Meanwhile, the fugitives moved through the country with surprising ease, leaving no clear trace of their direction or intention. Each discovery made their escape appear more advanced than previously believed, suggesting that the network helping them was not just organized, but extremely capable. The authorities were forced to admit that the fugitives were no longer simply running. They were following a sophisticated plan built on secrecy, precision, and a support system powerful enough to outsmart some of the best investigative units in the country. Days of silence finally ended when a grainy CCTV clip surfaced from a quiet industrial area in Manchester. The footage showed two figures wearing dark clothing and masks, leaving a seemingly abandoned warehouse in the early hours of the morning. Moments later, an explosion rocked the building, sending smoke and debris into the sky. Investigators rushed to the scene, expecting to find casualties or evidence of criminal activity, but the warehouse was almost empty. Inside, officers discovered stacks of forged passports, bundles of cash in different currencies, dozens of SIM cards, and a small weapons case, all abandoned as if left intentionally for discovery. The explosion itself had been a calculated distraction, designed to draw police resources while the fugitives moved elsewhere. This revelation left law enforcement stunned. Mason, Hale, and Connor Briggs were no longer hiding. They were manipulating the environment around them, creating chaos while maintaining control of their own movements. The forensic team meticulously analyzed the site, piecing together the evidence to understand the fugitives' intentions. Fingerprints and traces of DNA were almost non-existent, indicating careful planning and possibly the use of gloves or other protective measures. Experts concluded that the two men had chosen the warehouse for its location near multiple transportation hubs, allowing for quick access to trains, roads, or even hidden docks. The discovery confirmed what investigators had feared. The fugitives were not only skilled in evasion but also had a tactical understanding of law enforcement patterns. Each action was deliberate, calculated to confuse and mislead police, while keeping Mason and Connor a step ahead. As news of the explosion spread, public concern escalated. Media outlets broadcast images of the charred warehouse and shared livid information about the ongoing investigation. Citizens in Manchester became uneasy, unsure if the fugitives were still in the area or had moved on. Police received multiple tips, many of which turned out to be false or misleading. Each dead-end frustrated officers, reinforcing the perception that the fugitives were orchestrating their movements from behind a carefully constructed network of support. Analysts reviewing transportation and travel data found unusual patterns: rental vehicles disappearing without trace, trains used at odd hours, and courier services acting strangely. All signs pointed to an organized system operating in the shadows, guiding the fugitives from one point to the next with astonishing efficiency. The Manchester incident also revealed a psychological element to the fugitives' plan. By causing a public explosion without harming anyone, Mason and Connor demonstrated audacity and control, sending a message that they were untouchable. Investigators began to suspect that the men were not just fleeing, they were testing police responses, observing patterns, and learning from each interaction. Their confidence suggested experience in high-stakes criminal operations and an ability to think several moves ahead, almost like chess players anticipating every counter. This level of foresight left officers questioning whether traditional manhunt strategies would ever catch them. While police scrambled to track leads, the fugitives had already vanished again. Surveillance in neighboring towns picked up faint signs of movement, but by the time authorities arrived, both men had disappeared without a trace. Analysts noted that the timing of the warehouse explosion coincided with simultaneous activities in two other cities, suggesting a diversion strategy designed to split law enforcement attention. By the end of the week, Mason Hale and Connor Briggs were no longer just escaped prisoners. They had become figures of intrigue and fear. Their movements were deliberate, intelligent, and unpredictable, turning what might have been a simple manhunt into a complex game of strategy that kept the police perpetually one step behind. The realization settled heavily on the investigation. The fugitives were not only surviving, they were controlling the story. The investigation into Mason Hale and Connor Briggs seemed to take a decisive turn when an informant stepped forward, claiming knowledge of their next move. The man, presenting himself as a former associate of the fugitives, promised police precise information that could lead to their capture. Officers followed his lead to a secluded farmhouse in rural Yorkshire, expecting to find the fugitives cornered and vulnerable. The location appeared perfect, isolated, surrounded by dense woodland, and far from major roads. Surveillance teams set up in the surrounding area, preparing for what they believed would be a critical breakthrough in the chase. For hours, officers waited, quietly observing, ready to move in at the first sign of the fugitives. But the farmhouse remained empty, the windows dark, and no movements were recorded inside. What should have been a simple arrest turned into another frustrating dead end. The discovery inside the farmhouse only deepened the mystery. On the kitchen counter lay a small, unassuming device, a digital recorder. When analyzed, it contained a pre-recorded message from the fugitives themselves. The message mocked the efforts of the police, detailing their awareness of every attempted maneuver and every surveillance strategy. Investigators were stunned. The informant, whose tip had led them to the location, was revealed to be a double agent, feeding false information to manipulate the authorities. This revelation shook the trust within the investigation team. Officers began questioning not only the integrity of informants, but also the security of their internal communication. The fugitives had once again demonstrated a capacity to anticipate law enforcement tactics, turning the chase into a psychological game that left the police struggling to regain control. The fallout from the false lead extended beyond the immediate disappointment. Weeks of manpower and resources had been devoted to the Yorkshire operation, including roadblocks, aerial surveillance, and covert stakeouts. Entire teams had been diverted from other potential leads, effectively buying Mason and Connor more time to move freely across the country. Internal discussions within the police force grew tense, with debates over strategy, accountability, and the potential existence of additional collaborators. Analysts reviewing the incident suggested that the fugitives had meticulously studied police protocols, exploiting weaknesses to create predictable diversions. Every move made by law enforcement seemed anticipated, as if the fugitives were always observing, learning, and adapting in real time. The Yorkshire farmhouse incident also revealed the fugitives' growing audacity. The use of pre-recorded messages, combined with false tips, indicated a level of planning that went beyond mere survival. Mason and Connor were not only avoiding capture, they were actively controlling the narrative of the hunt. Each step of law enforcement action had been turned into a tool for misdirection, forcing the police to respond to phantom threats while the fugitives moved undetected. Analysts began to theorize that this level of manipulation required significant outside assistance, possibly from individuals with technical expertise or insider knowledge of policing procedures. The idea that someone might be orchestrating events from within the fugitives' network unsettled investigators and heightened public fear. By the time officers realized the informant's betrayal, the fugitives were long gone. Their ability to deceive, manipulate, and evade had grown more sophisticated with every encounter. The Yorkshire farmhouse episode became a defining moment in the investigation, highlighting the intelligence, patience, and cunning of Mason Hale and Connor Briggs. Law enforcement was left grappling with the unnerving reality that the fugitives were no longer merely running. They were orchestrating a strategic campaign designed to frustrate, humiliate, and outmaneuver the authorities at every turn. Each misstep by the police reinforced the fugitives' dominance, turning the hunt into a battle of wits in which the rules were constantly rewritten by those who refused to be caught. Investigators' breakthrough came unexpectedly, when financial and communication records linked Mason Hale and Connor Briggs to an old criminal syndicate operating in London's East End. The syndicate had been inactive for years, largely disappearing from public attention after a series of high-profile arrests. But its structure and contacts remained intact. Records indicated that Mason had previously served as a financial handler for the group, managing their money laundering operations and maintaining discreet networks for transferring large sums without drawing suspicion. Connor, meanwhile, had been involved in logistics, moving people, goods, and information across the country while avoiding police detection. These past connections suddenly shed light on the fugitives' movements since their escape, suggesting that their network was not merely opportunistic but deeply rooted in a sophisticated criminal ecosystem. As detectives explored the syndicate's history, they discovered that its members had a long-standing reputation for remaining invulnerable to law enforcement. They relied on a combination of carefully constructed identities, encrypted communications, and trusted intermediaries. This explained why Mason and Connor had remained undetected for so long. Despite nationwide alerts and intensive manhunts, analysts concluded that the fugitives were not just hiding. They were leveraging decades of experience and infrastructure to maintain mobility, security, and access to resources. The connection to the East End also provided insight into their strategic approach. Each location chosen for temporary shelter, supply drops, or financial transactions had been pre-selected for its proximity to trusted associates and safe routes, minimizing the risk of detection. Officers soon realized that the fugitives' movements followed a pattern reminiscent of past syndicate operations. Small-scale collections, discreet vehicle rentals, and untraceable communication channels all suggested a deliberate, methodical approach. Investigators began cross-referencing old syndicate contacts, looking for anomalies or unusual activity. It became apparent that Mason and Connor were not acting alone. They had coordinated with former associates who provided logistical support, technical skills, and intelligence on police operations. Every step they took seemed to be calculated, designed not only to evade capture but to maintain operational advantage over law enforcement. The connection to the syndicate also raised concerns about the fugitives' broader intentions. While initially thought to be focused solely on survival, evidence suggested that Mason and Connor were actively rebuilding influence and power. The resources they had gathered, fake identities, cash, and communications infrastructure, were consistent with the early stages of establishing a controlled network. Investigators realized that this was more than an escape. It was a strategic expansion, using the chaos caused by their breakout to consolidate power in secret. Analysts feared that if left unchecked, the fugitives could re-establish their operations on a scale rivaling the original syndicate, creating a new challenge for law enforcement both in the UK and abroad. By the time surveillance teams focused on the London area, Mason and Connor had already moved several steps ahead. The East End's dense urban landscape, with its labyrinthine streets, abandoned warehouses, and hidden courtyards, provided perfect cover for the fugitives. Investigators struggled to track them without tipping off the network, as any mistake could alert Mason and Connor to law enforcement's proximity. The connection to the syndicate transformed the investigation from a straightforward manhunt into a complex pursuit through a sophisticated criminal ecosystem. Mason Hale and Connor Briggs were no longer simply escaped prisoners. They were seasoned operatives, leveraging a network of allies and old loyalties, demonstrating an intelligence and resourcefulness that made even the most experienced detectives feel powerless and constantly reactive. One evening, after weeks of tracking sporadic and fragmented leads, surveillance teams finally caught a glimpse of a vehicle matching the description associated with Connor Briggs near London's Docklands. The area, with its mix of shipping containers, warehouses, and narrow alleyways, provided the perfect environment for someone attempting to remain unseen while moving valuable items or coordinating with associates. As officers prepared to move in, drones hovered above the complex, and uniformed patrols fanned out, ready to intercept the fugitives. It was one of the largest coordinated manhunts in recent British history, involving dozens of cars, aerial support, and rapid response teams. Every precaution was taken, yet even as the authorities closed in, the true nature of the situation remained hidden from them, setting the stage for a dramatic encounter. The initial chase unfolded through a maze of deserted streets and industrial parks. The vehicle swerved between abandoned car parks, loading docks and back alleys, testing both the driving skill of the pursuit teams and their coordination. Helicopters above tracked heat signatures, while police officers on the ground attempted to predict the fugitives' next move. Each maneuver seemed calculated, as if Connor anticipated every roadblock and contingency the police could deploy. For hours the chase continued in bursts of speed and sudden stops, giving the impression that the vehicle itself was alive, constantly adapting to evade capture. Despite the massive deployment of resources, the fugitives maintained a significant lead, leaving the authorities frustrated and increasingly aware of their own vulnerability. When the pursuit reached the heart of the Docklands shipping yards, officers prepared to corner the vehicle near a network of containers. Tactical teams moved into position, expecting a decisive arrest. Yet the fugitives had anticipated this maneuver as well. The vehicle that had been chased so relentlessly was revealed to be a decoy. Inside, police found no sign of Connor or Mason, only a few scattered belongings and signs that the car had been intentionally abandoned. The realization hit the investigation team with the force of shock. The fugitives had once again outsmarted the authorities, using deception to manipulate the manhunt and maintain their freedom. The decoy had not been a simple distraction. It was a strategic play designed to exploit predictable law enforcement tactics. Meanwhile, analysts traced subtle clues that hinted at the fugitives' next move. While attention was drawn to the Docklands, Mason and Connor were already moving undetected toward the coast. Small signals, overlooked at first, indicated the use of prearranged transportation, vehicles rented under false identities, timing coordinated with low traffic periods, and discreet access to hidden docking points. The fugitives' capacity to plan multiple steps ahead had turned a straightforward chase into a complex game of strategy, leaving police teams scrambling to respond to a constantly shifting scenario. Each failed interception reinforced the perception that Mason and Connor were not merely escaping, they were controlling the hunt itself. By the time officers understood the deception, the fugitives had vanished again, leaving behind a trail of calculated misdirection. Their actions in the Docklands illustrated not only remarkable skill in evasion, but also a deep understanding of law enforcement psychology. Mason and Connor had studied, anticipated, and exploited the police response, turning every tactical advantage offered by the authorities into a liability. The failed interception underscored a harsh reality. The fugitives were not just on the run. They were orchestrating events from a step ahead, shaping the pursuit in ways that left law enforcement reactive, rather than in control. For the police, the Docklands chase became a haunting reminder of their limits, and a stark warning of the intelligence, patience, and audacity possessed by these elusive criminals. Evidence gradually revealed that Mason Hale and Connor Briggs had made their way to the North Sea coast, their movements carefully timed to avoid detection. Investigators pieced together the details from scattered sightings, unusual maritime activity, and analysis of coastal traffic patterns. It appeared that the fugitives had gained access to a small, private fishing boat near Whitby, using forged documents and borrowed identities. The vessel itself was modest but seaworthy, perfectly suited for discreet travel along the coastline and into open waters. What disturbed authorities most was the precision of their departure. The boat had left port during low tide, and under the cover of early morning fog, minimizing visibility and evading surveillance from both land and sea. The fugitives had once again demonstrated an ability to plan ahead, taking into account variables such as patrol schedules, tides, and weather conditions. Within days, the vessel was found abandoned miles from the coast, drifting silently with no sign of the fugitives on board. Inside the boat, officers discovered personal items that appeared to have been left deliberately. A map marked with several routes across the North Sea, food supplies, navigational equipment and clothing. Yet there were no bodies, no evidence of struggle, and no signs of an accident. The lack of definitive clues left investigators questioning whether Mason and Connor had transferred to another vessel mid-sea, perhaps using smaller crafts or pre-arranged contacts waiting at offshore locations. Others speculated that they might have been picked up by associates in larger ships or ferries, vanishing entirely from British waters. The ambiguity created a frustrating dead end, leaving authorities to consider a growing list of possibilities while public concern mounted. The North Sea disappearance illustrated a terrifying combination of skill, patience, and boldness. It was clear that Mason and Connor had not fled randomly. They had studied maritime patterns, exploiting areas of sparse monitoring to maximize their chances of evasion. Analysts noted that such careful planning required not only knowledge of navigation, but also insider information about local patrols and coastal activities. The fugitives' actions suggested a sophisticated support network working in parallel with their movements, orchestrating logistics and ensuring that no traceable error occurred. Each misstep by authorities was anticipated and exploited, reinforcing the perception that the fugitives were always several moves ahead. As the investigation continued, law enforcement faced growing public scrutiny. Families of victims, local residents, and national media questioned how two high-profile fugitives could vanish so completely from heavily monitored areas. The uncertainty surrounding the North Sea added a layer of tension and fear. Some officials feared that Mason and Connor had moved abroad, blending into international ports and potentially engaging in further criminal activities on foreign soil. Others worried that the fugitives were using the disappearance to lay low temporarily before returning to operations within the UK. The possibility that they were alive and free, perhaps even thriving in new locations, was a constant source of anxiety for investigators. Despite extensive searches involving coast guards, naval patrols, and satellite monitoring, no definitive trace of the fugitives was ever found. Their North Sea escape became a defining moment in the case, demonstrating the limits of law enforcement and highlighting the intelligence and adaptability of Mason Hale and Connor Briggs. The incident cemented their reputation as elusive masterminds, capable of outthinking and outmaneuvering even the most experienced authorities. By the time investigators reconciled with the reality of their disappearance, the fugitives had already achieved another impossible feat, turning one of the most heavily surveilled regions in Britain into an arena for their silent and complete vanishing, leaving a haunting mystery that would continue to baffle officials for months, and perhaps years to come. Months passed after the North Sea disappearance, and Mason Hale and Connor Briggs remained elusive, their whereabouts completely unknown. The investigation had slowed to a painstaking pace, with leads drying up almost as quickly as they appeared. Analysts combed through European travel records, financial transactions, and border activity, hoping for any sign of movement, but the fugitives seemed to exist outside the reach of conventional tracking methods. Public interest waned as headlines faded, but law enforcement could not afford to stop searching. Every report of a sighting had to be taken seriously, as even the smallest clue could offer a breakthrough. Despite the frustration, investigators continued to piece together fragments, aware that the fugitives' intelligence and planning made them capable of evading capture indefinitely. Strange sightings continued across Europe, adding to the mystique surrounding the fugitives. In Spain, a police officer reported observing a man who resembled Mason withdrawing money with a forged card at a small ATM in a quiet town. Though the footage was grainy and the lid could not be confirmed, it suggested that Mason was capable of blending seamlessly into local communities while continuing to live under false identities. In Croatia, authorities discovered an abandoned vehicle linked to Connor's old associates, parked near a border crossing. The vehicle showed signs of recent activity, including food wrappers and items suggesting short-term occupation, but no one was present. These scattered incidents indicated that the fugitives were still mobile, moving through Europe in ways designed to avoid patterns and remain invisible to law enforcement. The possibility that Mason and Connor were living freely under new identities weighed heavily on investigators. The fugitives' prior actions suggested extraordinary skill in planning, logistics, and manipulation. Their ability to disappear in the North Sea demonstrated a level of resourcefulness that few could match. Authorities feared that the fugitives might have rebuilt their network in secrecy, leveraging contacts from old criminal affiliations to create safe havens across borders. If true, this would mean that Mason and Connor were not only surviving but thriving, capable of acting with impunity while law enforcement struggled to locate them. Every lead pointed to an intelligence that made traditional manhunt strategies ineffective. The psychological impact of the fugitives' continued freedom was significant. Law enforcement personnel felt a mixture of frustration and awe, recognizing that they were dealing with criminals who seemed to operate on a different level of foresight and patience. The public, meanwhile, speculated endlessly about the fugitives' fate. Conspiracy theories and sensational reports proliferated, portraying Mason and Connor as almost mythic figures, untouchable and omnipresent despite months of pursuit. The media attention combined with official silence only fueled the legends surrounding the fugitives, making their story one of the most compelling and unnerving criminal narratives of the decade. By the end of the year, Mason Hale and Connor Briggs had achieved what few fugitives ever had. They had become symbols of elusiveness and cunning. Authorities acknowledged that while traditional investigative techniques had failed to capture them, the case itself offered valuable lessons in criminal strategy, anticipation, and the importance of adaptive thinking. The fugitives' disappearance left a lasting question in the minds of law enforcement and the public alike. Were Mason and Connor living undetected, perhaps planning a return to influence and crime, or had they vanished completely, leaving their legend to haunt Europe and beyond? The uncertainty became the most chilling aspect of the story, a reminder that some criminals are not merely on the run, they are orchestrating their freedom with precision, intelligence, and a level of foresight that can leave even the most experienced authorities powerless.